Hello, welcome to Humanities 140, Critical Thinking in the Modern Age. Today we will cover Chapter 6, Values and Assumptions. So let's start off this conversation by defining the term values. Values are a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment or beliefs. This is the idea on how we filter information in our world. They influence everything about our lives. So, for example, the values of a critical thinker include autonomy, which is another way of saying independent thought, curiosity, the ability to look stuff up and say, wow, I want to learn more about these things. And finally, reasonableness, that need for logic and a definitive reason why. So values are the way we see the world. Now, this is a very quick comparison between the United States and some Asian countries in terms of values. If you want to look specifically at the third bullet, where under Asian countries it says, group is the most important part of society and it is emphasized for motivation. Whereas in the United States, the individual is the most important part of society and is emphasized for motivation. What that essentially means is that in a lot of Asian countries, you don't seek individual success. You seek success for a group. So teamwork is much more emphasized than individual accomplishment. Then if you look at the third bullet from the bottom, where it says protocol, rank, and status are important. And in the United States, informality and competence is important. So in Asian countries, elderly people are extremely important because they have the status of being older and wiser. Whereas in the United States, it's more informal, and we don't tend to see elderly people as all that valuable. We look more for the young, competent people. Going on to the next bullet, personal conflicts are avoided in Asian countries, whereas conflict is energy to be managed in the United States, which is why we see so many attorneys. So these are just some examples of how values can be very, very different within the context of two different areas of the world. Now, we also have things that are called unstated values. And unstated values are the beliefs that the speaker or the writer assume you share. Consequently, they are called assumptions. So, if you assume that everybody values privacy, you may be strongly wrong when it comes to things like going to the airport and having to get searched, or when the police pull you over and do a search. Value conflicts emerge because people each have their own set of beliefs and ethics. These contrary beliefs exist because people have different perspectives and experiences. So, for example, if you have somebody who has a very strong, supportive, loving family, their perspective on the value of family is going to be much different than somebody who grew up in a very dysfunctional household where the parents were not supportive, were very abusive or neglectful, and as a consequence, these experiences change the way we see the value or our value of family. So here's another example of a value conflict. So the statement of belief: drugs should not be legalized because they contribute to street violence and other crimes. Now, the value assumption is that safety and social stability are the most important aspects in society. However, value conflict comes in because some people believe that an individual's rights are more important. So, again, what we have to look at here, and this is the most important element in this lecture, is that everybody comes with their own values, and you cannot assume that they share the same values as you, because they didn't grow up the same way, they didn't have the same experiences, they did not learn the same things you learned. We also have a priority level for our values. So every value, such as freedom or justice, can be measured on a continuum, a line that extends infinitely to the right and to the left. There is no absolute agreement amongst a society about a particular value. So, for example, Americans value freedom. We're all about freedom. But we also put limits on our own freedoms. So people are not free to kill others, and they are not free to use drugs recreationally except in certain states. Yet, some people feel that killing is justified in some cases. So, for example, some states have the death penalty, and some people feel that drugs should be available recreationally, such as marijuana. So, when we look at these continuums, and I have some examples of culture or country-based values. In the United States, as we had mentioned, the individual and the importance of the individual is so much more important than the group, whereas in Japan, group, team, a sense of support amongst a group of people is the most important element. In terms of equality, we like to think of the United States as being fairly equal. However, if you look at other cultures, other countries, you'll see that Norway is much more equal than we are. Whereas Indonesia, which still has a royal family, is based on the hierarchy. Royal families are more important than the middle class, which is more important than the working poor. Then we have direct communication, and again, you have the Dutch, very direct, the Germans, very direct, and then you get into some of the Arabic countries, and it's more indirect, because direct communication is perceived as being rude. A lot of times what we see happen is this concept called competing values, which means that prioritizing our values determines which values are most important. So we have to take values that are very, very important to us, and if they are competing, we have to figure out which one is the priority. So, for example, your younger sibling tells you that they have a serious drug problem. Would you tell your parents? So on the one side, you feel a sense of loyalty to your sibling, and that you would like to help them, but you know that they don't want you to tell your parents. On the other hand, you know that your parents could help if you were honest with them. So the question then becomes, what is more important in terms of the value? Loyalty or getting help with your parents for your sibling? And this is not an easy question, which is why it's one of those questions that is very hard to decide upon unless there is a value that is not listed here. So part of our curriculum is to look at how do we identify value assumptions, because everything you read, everything you write is written by or spoken by a person who has their own individual values. So if this is a political issue, ask yourself, is that person a Republican or a Democrat? Are they a union member or not? Do they have a white-collar job or a blue-collar job? Because their perspective is going to be very different than somebody on the other side of that continuum. Keep in mind that people are not always predictable, so it's best to look for other clues to help identify value assumptions. So, what we have to look at is, the totality of the evidence, not just one or two pieces of evidence. We have to look at all the evidence, and that is the hard part, is finding out the evidence. And again, we become intellectual detectives trying to determine where this person is coming from. So another way to identify the value assumptions of speakers or writers is to examine their reasoning. So, for example, fracking, which is pulling natural gas out of the earth by pushing water into crevices, is a dangerous way to pull natural gas out of the earth because it can pollute groundwater. The reasoning is based on pollution, so we can hypothesize that the person who wrote this statement values environmental causes or public health. Then the next example, fracking offers states a way to increase their revenues without increasing the tax burden on its citizens. And the reasoning here is based on keeping taxes low. So we can hypothesize that the person who wrote this statement values lower taxes. By identifying the reasons that somebody feels a particular way, we can identify the values that are most important to them. Another series of ways to look at value assumptions. Ask yourself why the speaker is so invested in reaching their conclusions using these particular set of reasons. Will they gain or lose anything from this opinion? Our Pennsylvania's former governor, Tom Corbett, was very much in favor of fracking, and he did not believe that we should be charging the gas companies a extraction fee or taxing them. And what does he gain from this? Well, he gains a lot of political donations. However, when it came time for election, his reasons were so absurd that Tom Wolfe was able to win because his main campaign promise was to start charging these gas companies for the extraction of all the natural gas, which is what most of the other states do in the country. Also, look at the issue from other people's perspectives. People don't always agree on the reasons, but they may agree on the conclusion. So, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and you'll have the opportunity to see something from their perspective. Examine the opposing view and seek out the reasons people support it. So when we did the pro-con assignment in class, you had to look at both sides of the issue. And again, you have your own opinion, but based on both sides of the opinion, you can make a better opinion because you have reasons that are acknowledged to be reasonable. So here's some common value assumptions that you will run into. The first one, do you believe that God leads us to our choices or that individuals are responsible for the choices they make? Now, this isn't demanding that somebody associate themselves with a particular religion. Rather, do you believe that God intervenes in some way, or there's some sort of spiritual intervention? Or do you believe that you make your own fate or destiny? The second one, do you believe that healthcare is a right that the government should control, or do you believe that healthcare is an optional program that the government should stay out of? So, in a nutshell, is healthcare a natural right? And some people will say that it is, and other people will say, you know what? If you can't afford healthcare, you shouldn't have access to it because we live in a capitalist country. So again, it's all depending on your perspective. Do you believe that caring for people is the most important thing, or do you believe that caring for oneself is most important? So we look at scenarios in terms of how they will benefit us. But do you look at scenarios and how they can potentially benefit others? And that's really the question. Finally, do you believe that poor people are poor because they are lazy and too reliant on government handouts? Or do you believe that poor people lack the opportunities and advantages of middle class and wealthy families? Now, if you come from the perspective of somebody who has studied sociology, you're going to believe the second part, which is that they lack the opportunities and advantages. However, if you are somebody who has never been poor and has never experienced any kind of deprivation, you may believe that everyone has the same advantages that you have, because that is their perspective. So the question then becomes, can you change a person's values? So when it comes to values, most of us are reluctant to change. However, changes can be effected if the reasoning is rational, logical, and compelling. And the primary example here is how society changed in terms of smoking cigarettes. Back in the 1950s, everybody smoked. Everybody. You can watch movies, everybody is smoking. Well, somewhere in the 1980s, towards the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, it was revealed that the tobacco companies not only knew that smoking could cause lung damage, cancer, and any variety of problems, but that they hid the studies that prove this. And this criminal activity that was perceived by people as just being immoral, unethical, changed the way people looked at tobacco companies. And then over the past 25 years or so, what we've seen is a serious decline in the number of people who smoke cigarettes. Interestingly, the more education a person has, the more likely they are to not smoke. Now, in some cases, people can be dogmatic in their beliefs. Dogma means a belief or a set of beliefs that is accepted by the members of a group without being questioned, regardless of proof. So, people believe things despite the fact that there's no proof. And one of the big examples in the last 5 or 6 years is the belief that autism was caused by vaccines, which has been proven time and time again to not be correct. However, you had a small group of people who were dogmatic in their belief, and they continued to spread this information. And because it was wrong, you had a lot of kids dying of very preventable diseases. Studies have shown that the more dogmatic a person is about a topic, the less likely they are to change their opinion, much less their values. So with some people, you will never get them to see things from anyone's perspective but their own. And this is a person who lacks critical thinking skills. They refuse to acknowledge anyone else's perspective because they know they are right, even though they may not have any logical reasons to claim their accuracy. Now, this little cartoon over here on the right, you have a guy who's wearing a t-shirt with a fish, which is a Christian symbol, and he is putting his fingers in his ears saying, "Okay, I'm ready." And the caption says, "The way that creationists respond when asked to listen to the facts that support evolutionary biology and every other field of science that conflicts with their theology." Now, if you believe that the earth was created by God and that we came to the earth as mankind and Adam and Eve, that's fine. But also listen to the other side. It doesn't mean you have to change your mind. It doesn't mean you have to change your theology. But it's important to listen to both sides, because then you can make a good choice. So, in a lot of cases, you can change a person's values. And you can do this based on a sociological theory called contact theory. This theory states that under appropriate conditions, interpersonal contact is one of the most effective ways to reduce prejudice between groups that are in conflict with one another. So how does it work? Well, given the opportunity to communicate with others from another group, we are able to understand and appreciate different points of views involving their way of life. As a result, a new appreciation and understanding, prejudice should diminish, which should lead to less conflict. So, for example, if you are somebody who has never met a person of the Muslim faith and you get stuck in an elevator for 5 hours with someone who is Muslim, and it's just you and this other person, well, after the first half hour of awkward quietness, you probably will strike up a conversation. And what begins to happen is you see this person not as this monolithic representation of a religion you don't understand, but rather as a person who has a family, who has a faith, who has dreams and hopes, and you begin to see them as a person and not just as a group. Alrighty, well, that is going to do it for this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email or text message me. I hope you have a great day, and don't make any assumptions.